This is Paul Schneiderman today on the 130th edition of the Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio. My special guest today is Steve Kelley, retired Seattle Times sports columnist. Steve last joined me about 2 years ago in July of 2021, literally about 2 years to the day. Mentioned I have a new assistant, Olivia Coyne. Olivia's dad's one of my closest friends, Ben. Olivia's doing a good job helping me as a producer and assistant. She is now a student at the University of Washington. My shows are also on Podbean, YouTube, Amazon, iTunes, Spotify. Trying to get it back up on Rumble, and you can go to sportsuntoldpodcast.net and plslawoffices.com. And I encourage my listeners to click the like button, comment, and go to sportsuntoldpodcast.net, where you can check out my show and some of those outlets. Obviously, only favorable comments, of course, but as mentioned, Steve Kelley is a retired sports columnist at the Seattle Times. He also worked at the Oregonian in Portland as a columnist. Steve continues to be involved in the community as a basketball coach, tutor, and theater supporter of the Shakespeare Theater in Seattle. I grew up reading Steve's columns, and it's been fun to get to know him on a personal level for quite a few years now. Steve is my most frequent guest. It's great to have Steve come on. And I
do I get like a gold watch or something for that?
Yeah, no, exactly, for sure. I should find you a good gold watch. Yeah, but I appreciate you coming back on Sports Untold, Steve. It's always fun to have you.
Always a pleasure.
Good. Hey, I asked you 2 years ago who's a living sports figure you'd love to spend time with, and you said Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It was a good answer. Here's a new question I have for you. Who's a sports executive, an owner, an agent, someone on the business side of sports that you would find fascinating to spend some time with?
Howard Slusher. Howard was an agent for Gus Williams when Gus was a holdout in 1982, I think. No, 1980. What was it? The mid 1980s. Gus held out the entire season with the Sonics. Howard was his agent, Paul Westfall's agent, Tom Chambers' agent, Danny Vrain's agent. He wasn't a 10% guy. He negotiated his other deals. He was a friend. Every year, he lived in Palos Verdes. Every year he had a summertime Olympics where there would be all these events with these great athletes, Paul Westphal, all of his guys, and they brought other guys, and there were like water polo might have been the most physical, brutal, blood spilling water polo game of all time. But he became the chief counsel for Nike, and he was just brilliant. He would call me up. He was one of my great sources at the time, and I loved the guy. And I spent time with him. I just wanted to get to know him really well, and but he would call me every once in a while during the Gus Williams thing and give me information, and he'd say, "I'm going to make you a Pulitzer Prize winner," which never happened, by the way. But just a great guy.
Is he still with us, Howard
really
Slusher? Is he still with us, Howard Slusher?
Yes, he's become kind of a recluse, though. He's more Howard Hughes than he used to be. But it'd be worth looking into.
Oh, he'd be a fascinating to talk to. I remember as a young kid that early 80s Gus Williams contract dispute where he sat out the whole year, and the name Howard Slusher came up a lot in that early 80s era in Seattle. So.
Yeah, no, he was pretty much public enemy number one, and I had just come up to Seattle. I'd been working in Portland, and he had been giving all the information to me when I was working in Portland, and then I came up to Seattle, and I went down to his home in Palos Verdes and did a feature on him. And I was like public enemy number one for what are you talking to that guy for? He's the devil. But really enjoyed it. He's very professional, very, very smart.
Is he an attorney by training, Slusher?
Yes.
Yeah, he would be.
He taught law at USC.
Okay. Wow. He'd be interesting. I never asked you this question. I'm getting into some of these questions I usually get to in the middle of the end of the interview. I'm kind of doing a reverse today, kind of getting to some of these early on. What's Steve Kelley's favorite sports movie?
Well, I'm not good at that. I mean, I don't really watch. I would say Brian's Song. I don't watch a lot of sports movies for some reason. But yeah, Brian's song. I mean, just the whole that friendship and the way it just kind of blossomed, and how just grueling it was for Brian Piccolo and obviously for Gail Sayers, um, and how close they were. I mean, that was terrific.
Great one. Yeah, with yeah, James Caan passed last year, and
Yeah,
he was in a few sports movies, James Caan. Um, would you consider Rollerball a sports movie? You ever see that? That
yeah,
sci-fi?
yeah. I did see it. I mean, I thought it was a pretty good movie,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's borderline. It's borderline. There was a movie a few years ago, um, about I can't remember, for the fight in Miami. Um, I wish you hadn't asked me this. See, these are the questions you asked me, and then I turn out to be really stupid with the
Oh, you
answers.
were great. You
But
did.
there was a movie like 2 years ago about a boxing match in Miami. It was a biopic, and I thought that was great. So I thought it was so great I can't remember the name or the boxers, but I'll Google it
Let me know.
and I'll call you back.
And Billy D. Williams is still with us, who played Gail Sayers.
I'm sorry.
Billy D. Williams, who played Gail
Yeah, oh
Sayers.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good one. That's definitely one of my favorite sports movies. I think another guest or two mentioned Brian's song. All right. What is a very good sports book?
Well, I'm partial, but I think the best sports book ever written, and certainly the best basketball book ever written, was The Breaks of the Game by David Halberstam. And I'm partial to that because I saw the whole process from the day. The way it all came about was I was talking to Jack Ramsey one day, and the coach of the Trailblazers. And I mentioned the fact that David Halberstam was a hero of mine. I mean, I read his dispatches from Vietnam every day. And he was one of the few journalists over there who went out in the field with the soldiers and got the real story and told the real truth about the war. So he was a hero of mine anyway. I told Jack Ramsey that, and Jack said, I mean, this is just, the serendipity of life that makes life worth living. And Jack says, well, guess what? David's coming to town tomorrow. Do you want me to introduce you? I'm like, I'm excited. I'm scared to death. And he said, yeah, well, I'll arrange a coffee for you. So I had coffee with David the next day. He was great. I had told him about how I had driven from York, Pennsylvania, where I was working, to Philadelphia to a book meeting to listen to him speak. And he got sick and he wasn't there. So he was effusive in his apology, and I'm sorry I was sick, and all of that. But then as we're talking, he says, I'm writing a book about the Trailblazers. My editors don't want me to do it because it's Portland, Oregon. They'd rather me do the Knicks or the Celtics or the Lakers. But he thought that Portland was where basketball, society, race, all the issues in America were happening in Portland with the Portland Trailblazers. He was right. His book is, I tell every young sports writer, especially guys who want to cover the NBA, you got to read this book because it's a primer. For me, it was grad school watching him go through it, but it everything he talks about then in the '80s is still apropos today.
It's a great book.
Money,
And we talked about it the first time I had you on back in 2017, and you had a role in the book. You were like, I described you as like a supporting actor role in the book. You were he would Halberstam confer with you, and it's one of the best basketball books ever, and an amazing sports book, The Breaks of the Game.
yeah, and there. I don't know. Well, David Remnick, who is the editor of New Yorker. He was a sports writer for the Washington Post, then went to Moscow and became bureau chief. But I met him in Dallas. We were covering John Elway's rookie year with the Broncos in training camp, and every day Elway met with three writers for lunch, and he didn't like it. And I said, I don't know, I have lunch with writers all the time. I don't know what your problem is. But David was so excited to meet me. I mean, I don't know why, except that I had been in Halberstam's book. He was about to take over the Washington Bullets beat, and just was grilling me about questions about how do I cover this team. And I just kept saying, read the book, read the book.
Well, that book, as you mentioned, Steve, it gets into labor issues and race
Yeah.
issues. And I mean, as you mentioned, the issues still go on today, of course, but it's a terrific book. Yeah. Yeah. Great one. Well, Steve, I was going to ask this question later, but it kind of ties in to where we are right now in this interview. And I actually sent you an article about this the other day, but the New York Times is ending its sports section. And you know a lot of the well-known sports writers in America. Um, it's going to be replaced. The New York Times is replacing it with their website, The Atlantic, which it now owns, which is, I believe, a heavily sports-based website. Let me give you a quote from someone and give me your take on this. Boston Globe columnist Bob Ryan called July 10th, the day this was announced, a day that will live in infamy for anyone who cares about American sports journalism. What's your take on Ryan's perspective on the New York Times shutting down its sports section?
Well, it's absurd, and I think it's a blatant end around attempt to deep six the union. The Athletic is non-union, and to farm out all their sports to non-union people when the rest of their staff are union people, that's not right. And they've filed an official grievance now, and so it's not over yet.
I didn't know that. I didn't know agreements was filed. Wow. Wow.
I think it just happened today,
Wow.
and it doesn't make sense. But then the New York Times sports section has always been a little different, and it's become even more and more esoteric. And it's the kind of thing, and this is an exaggeration, but it's the kind of thing where in the middle of the Super Bowl week, they might have a story about how cornhole is exploding in the Seychelles Islands. I mean,
Right.
I'm serious.
Right.
You pick up the paper and you want to find out about Jalen Hurts, and there's two guys in Seychelles Islands throwing beanbags at each other,
Right.
and it's like a 40-inch story. Um, so there's that part of it. Also, however, when I used to read David Halberstam, I would flip over. This was when I was in high school. I would flip over to the sports, of course, and Arthur Daly was one of the columnists there, and um, he would write columns, and I would always read it on Monday when he would write about the Jets or the Giants, and I mean, he wrote really great game columns, and then I was hooked. And Red Smith, Ira Burkow, um, uh, Robert Lipsyte. I mean, those guys were writers. They weren't just sports writers. George Vesey. They were people who knew about the fiber of America, and they knew that sports reflect. It's like Halberstam said, it sports reflects American life, and to take that away from that paper, um, I won't miss the Seychelles Islands, but I'll miss Kurt Streeter's columns. Tyler Kepner still writes great baseball stuff to read. You could pick up the paper one day and see some silliness on the front page of sports, and then below it there would be a Jerry Longman long feature on a track star right before the Olympics, or World Cup player, World Cup team. Great stuff, great reporting. I mean, they still have a slew of great writers, and to think that those writers are now going to hop on start writing about baking, or interviewing a trapeze artist who's going to be at Madison Square Garden. No, they like gritty stories.
Kurt Streeter is a Seattle Roosevelt High School guy too.
Yeah,
Know
he
him,
still
but
lives here.
yeah. Oh, he still lives here. I gotta know. I'd love to get on my show at some point.
Yeah, get
It
him
was
on.
interesting. It was interesting you mentioned the union issue. I was just reading a column by Dave Zirin, the Nation sports columnist, and he looks at sports from a lefty perspective. And he mentioned that he believes it was a union busting move where they can outsource their writers to the Atlantic. So you mentioned something I already read from Zirin. But you gave me an update that apparently agreements was found. And I'll share with you, Steve, I have said for years that I have thought that the Wall Street Journal and New York Times have had underrated sports sections where you could kind of get a different perspective. And I know they had some quirky stories that you mentioned, but I think both those papers have had some good sports coverage over the years.
They wrote about different things. They wrote about social issues. Every paper has great writers who understand kind of the big picture of sports. Sally Jenkins at the Washington Post, who might be the best sports writer in the country, has a handle on that. And I don't miss any of her columns. I just wish she wrote more. Like every great columnist that I ever read, Jim Murray, John Shulian in Chicago. I mean, it's like, oh no, they're not writing today. My day is empty. And that's the great thing about great columnists is you look forward to every column, or you try to look up. You hope that every column was as good as the one before. And those guys brought it.
Well, let's see what happens. Maybe one day the New York Times will bring it back. You never know. You never know.
Well, it's not over yet. It's
not
definitely
over.
not over yet.
Too.
And I think if I can just say the
Yeah,
backlash is pretty profound right now, and that might change their mind. But they need a different mindset too. You know,
Right.
and they're the perfect ones to cover gender-based sports right now. Gender and transgender issues, they're huge, and there's no easy answer for them who can compete in what sports and how. There's a lot of that's an issue that nobody's touching, it seems like to me. And the other story, every once in a while I get a little itchy to write something, and the other story is gambling. And you know, the 4 NFL players that were suspended for gambling, I think right after that news broke on NFL Network, they had a commercial for one of the betting agencies. You know, so it's like it's so hypocritical. And I'm surprised that the 4 players who got suspended aren't working for Dual Dash now or FanDuel, because they'd be experts.
Steve, you mentioned something a minute ago. I remember I asked this question several years ago if you would ever come out of retirement and write some columns. You said, no way, no way. But you said a minute ago you get the itch to write sometimes. Where are you on that?
Well, you know, I used to write on a good day to probably close to 1 million people on Sunday. And now I do Facebook posts for, 15 people, my 15 friends on Facebook.
Gotcha.
I don't know. You know, I have a friend of mine, David Shields, who is professor at the UW, creative writer, award winner, and he's always bugging me to just get your butt in the seat and start writing. And I do that, and I get bored. I'm not bored from the writing. I'm bored with what I'm writing. So, but I do. If I was writing a column today, everybody's talking about Jared Klenick kicking the water cooler. Nobody's interviewing the water cooler. I would like to do an interview on the water cooler because it's not his fault. And he's dented up. He's got no water. He's dehydrated. I mean, I would like to play around with that a little bit.
Yeah, no, good. We'll keep up the Facebook posts at least. We can see some of your writing then now and then. So keep it up.
I'll do my best.
You mentioned we're going to the Mariners in a minute, and that was one of the questions from the listeners as a Mariner, which inevitably I was going to hit on today. But you mentioned about gender in sports, and a Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, Megan Rapinoe, is announced her retirement. And by the way, she got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Biden, not President Trump, if anyone's wondering. But but I just like you to comment on her legacy, Megan's legacy, as she announced her retirement the other day.
Well, she just was part of the group that got the Arthur Ashe Award for courage from the ESPYs, excuse me. Well, she's a firebrand, and I think she's lit a fire under all of her teammates. She's been outspoken about every issue, every female woman's issue in sports. She's been right on everything. I mean, she has a lot of enemies in sports, even in women's sports, for her outspokenness. But she's a hero. There's no doubt about it. She's a hero to women athletes. She's a hero to girls coming up. She's making life better for the next generation. And she's also a great player. And it takes a great player, I think, to rally the forces that needed to be rallied. And think about every kind of political group, everybody that she had to push to get equal pay and equal opportunities. And the WNBA still flies for the most part commercial. And so, gee whiz, Brittany Griner gets accosted in an airport, not physically, but verbally accosted, um, because she's on a commercial flight to the next game. Um, there has to be some that issue has to be addressed as well. And I don't know who the NBA player is going to be. I think it might. I think Megan Rapinoe. That might be part of her next chapter in life. Is she's going to be a spokesman like Billie Jean King for women's sports?
Do you think a Rapinoe, you mentioned Billie Jean King a minute ago, is sort of an activist for women's sports in the same way that Ali and Russell did a lot for black athletes and the civil rights movement? Do you put her in that? Do you think historians will put her in that level as an advocate?
Yeah, and Ellie wasn't just sports. Bill Russell wasn't just about sports,
True,
and Megan Rapinoe's not just about sports.
true, true. Well, going to the Mariners now, I think right
Do we have
now,
to?
what's that?
Do we have to?
Well, I know they're so mediocre. It's just like talking about mediocre food almost.
Yeah.
It's
Let's
you know
talk
it's
about
like
Cole. Let's talk about coleslaw for a while.
it's not talking about catalysts. It's talking about just the most mediocre. It's kind of like talking about frozen food that you anyhow. But I've had a lot more frozen food in my life than catalysts. But anyhow, so they're about what 5 games of the wild card right now. I think as we speak, about 9.5 out of first place. Um, what's your general take? Which they do at the deadline? Just share a little more about the M's this year.
Well, I don't go to the clubhouse anymore, so all of my thoughts are just kind of sports fans thoughts, and also I do go up to the press box and talk to the writers every once in a while. To me, there's a lack of discipline on this team. There's a lack of seriousness on this team. Um, I think they're having a good time. I think Julio's, even though he's only hitting 240, whatever, is having a great time. Um, I see them laughing a lot as they're coming off the field, losing 5-0. And I don't think that sends a very good message to the fans. I've been really fortunate to sit twice this year in the Diamond Club and right next to the dugout. And I watched the dugout closely. There's very little talk. There's very little energy. It's not a typical dugout. And so many guys like Jared Kelnick, are they're so wrapped up in what they're not doing that it affects the next at bat, the next fly ball to left field. He dropped a fly ball Tuesday night in the 10-3 loss. And then he kicked the water cooler a little later and broke his foot. There's a lack of discipline on the team. Um, I think Scott Service is too passive, but more than that, back in the day with the Mariners, there was Mark McLemore, there was Griffey, there was Jay Buhner, there was Jamie Moyer. There were guys who, they didn't scream and yell maybe, but they would pull a player aside. Mark McLemore was in guys' faces and in an honest way, not in a jerk way, in an honest way. I don't know who that is. I think Gino Suarez, third baseman, is a great guy and a solid human being, solid player, but he just doesn't seem to have that. JP Crawford has all of the energy, but again, I think it's not his role. So I don't know who on that team should be that guy. It's not Julio.
Steve, when you look at this 500 team, and who knows, maybe they'll go have a big winning streak, and a couple weeks from now we'll have a different conversation with this team. As it stands right now, they're probably not going to make the playoffs, statistically speaking. You never know. I mean, things could happen. But do you put some blame on management and just maybe not putting together the best 2023 roster?
I don't think they did much in the offseason unless you think AJ Pollock and Colton Wong are going to have great second halves to the year. Um, it's all, I don't think this is happening, but it just, the impression is that they're waiting for Otani. And if you've ever seen the play Waiting for Godot, it doesn't work out. It doesn't work out waiting for Godot or for Otani. Um, and I think their pitching staff is so good. And I mean, the only problem with these guys is they're young and they're going to have their dips. And they're going to have their little injuries like Bryce Miller now. But they've got to do something to take a pitcher or two and trade them for seasoned good bats. And I don't think it's going to happen at the trade deadline, but as they move forward, and they could have done it last offseason, but as they move forward, I just think they put too much. They thought Ty France was going to have the same year. They thought Teoscar Hernandez, when he's not running through a stop sign and getting thrown out at the plate, was going to be an offensive juggernaut. Um, they misfired on three guys, Hernandez, Wong, and Pollock, and they didn't improve the team. And yeah, so a lot of that falls on them.
I hear this sort of defense of Mariners management that they, by giving Rodriguez and Costello long-term deals at the end of last year, those were sort of the equivalent to long-term moves. I've heard that argument that they locked those two guys in for a while. But
Yeah, well, I've been watching Julio a lot, and I'm not a hitting coach, but it seems to me he's guessing on too many pitches, and he's getting fooled all the time. And he's not veteran enough to guess on pitches, I don't think. And he's also kind of got that home run derby thing in his head that every time he comes up in a close game, I can win this game with one swing of the bat. Um, and when you have the combination of I'm thinking slider on this pitch and I'm going to hit it out, and it's a inside fastball that you can't catch up to. Um, and that swing doesn't look very good. I've seen that a lot from him. He just seems to be guessing. And um, I think the hitting coach maybe should address that.
interesting observations, a lot there. By the way, you mentioned that we talked about the possibility of doing a deal before the deadline. How would you feel if the trade away a whole bunch of really good players, maybe some prospects to get Otani? You could end up being a rent a player. Would you? How would you feel if they made a deal like that, a mega deal for Otani?
I I think it's too late because I don't think he's going to take him to the playoffs. And it's look how great he is, and look what he's done for the Angels. Practically nothing. And he hasn't done anything with the Angels financially. They're making just as much, no more, than they were making the year before he came. Their attendance is a little bit down from when he came. That their average attendance. He's not doing enough to bankrupt your franchise for 2 months. Now, if the wild card in all this for the Mariners is Ichiro, and Otani worships Ichiro. I mean, he there's God and then there's Ichiro. Somewhere I don't know who fits where, but the problem for Otani, these are the Japanese reporters telling me this. As much as he loves Ichiro, he's not sure he wants to have Ichiro around every day of the season, and judging him. And so I think it would be up to Ichiro to call him, visit him, and say, "I want you badly. This team, you are the difference maker on this team. Um, will He's going to get whatever money he wants. So that's not really an issue. The Mariners will give him as much as the Dodgers, Yankees. They will because they understand. But Ichiro will say, I'll stay out of your way. When you need me, I'll be here. Don't treat me like I'm otherworldly. I'm Ichiro. I'm your friend, I'm your mentor. I'm not somebody who's going to push you into places you don't feel comfortable.
Steve, let me back up for a second. Do you really think John Stanton and the Mariners ownership group is going to be comfortable writing a check for over $500 million for Ohtani for a long-term deal? Are you skeptical at all they're actually going to do it if they had the opportunity to do it?
I think the Mariners would give him whatever he needs.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay.
I really think
You think
that. I think they with the pitching they have now. I'm talking off season. I'm not talking the rest of this season.
right.
So that they can keep their team intact, if they can keep working, um, just letting him know without without colluding, letting him know that we want you and we'll make a team for you. Now I know the Angels have tried that, but it didn't work. But no, free agents don't like coming here. But if Ohtani comes here, I think you're going to see the makings. The other pieces will fall together because players are going to want to play here.
There could be something there. It would be a huge Seattle free agent signing.
Oh
Maybe
yeah, yeah.
a huge one, but we'll see what happens. Steve, I want to give you a couple thoughts, and feel free to challenge me on this. I went to the 2023 All-Star game. Yeah, I had a good time, of course, but I was sitting really high up, and the players were not wearing their own uniforms. I didn't really know who was who. What I thought the prices were just outrageous for events. Um, how do you feel about me being a little mildly disappointed with my All-Star game experience this year?
Well, let's start with the money. I went to I went through the baseball writers to get two tickets for the home run derby, two tickets for the game,
Yeah,
thinking, well, I'm not getting a deal, but I'll probably get some fairly cheap face value tickets. Well, I did get face value tickets, but they were $300 for the All-Star game, $400 for the home run derby, or
right.
no, vice versa, 300 for the home run derby, 400 for the All-Star game, and so I spent a cool $1,400 to watch this, and I didn't like. It's an exhibition game, right? So when Gurriel hits the home run and celebrates running around the bases, we don't appeal that. We don't look at it again. It's an exhibition game. This was a great moment. Let's leave it at that. But instead, we stop the game and it was foul by inches. Forget it. Let's turn the clock back to 1985 and just call it a home run. I think there was a stolen base later, and maybe even in that inning where it was hard to tell whether the runner was out or safe. They reviewed it. He was out. Um, why? We had a runner on second. We might have had some action. Um, great. There were some great defensive plays, but I mean, it's an exhibition game, and I don't think you should have to spend uh, $1,400 for an exhibition game.
I don't. Yeah, I just in the package the M sold it. They lock you into all those extras, and so a friend took me to the game, and I paid him a nice little chunk for the ticket. But and I went with another friend, Ben, actually Olivia's dad, who took me to the Futures game. But I don't know. I had a good time, but it was.
Me too.
I thought the 79 game was a lot more colorful, and the 01 game was more colorful in some ways. So, but anyhow, do you think an event like that will help Seattle be more on the map for as a host for big sports entertainment? Or do you think it's just a wash? Doesn't really matter.
No, it won't make a difference.
Gotcha.
We'll still get the World Cup, and I was excited about the World Cup, and then see, I sold both of my kidneys for playoff tickets for the Kraken, and I'm not feeling very well right now, but that's a whole other story.
I know.
But so I have nothing left to buy World Cup tickets with, and so it's hard to get excited if you're a fan in Seattle and you want to go to these cool events and you can't get in. And in Major League Baseball's case, you can't even get into a restaurant. Maybe that you'd like to have a nice meal, a nice pregame meal. So there's all of that I don't like. But you mentioned the uniforms, and one of the one of the really exciting things for me, the first All-Star game I went to was in 1959 in Baltimore. And I'm guessing there were 25 Hall of Famers in that game. I mean, everybody was there. Aaron, Mays, Frank Robinson. It was amazing. I was 10 years old, but it was amazing. And they all wore their team uniforms. They didn't wear an American League uniform and a National League uniform, and that's changed now. And the only reason it's changed is because they could sell merchandise. They could
Right.
sell American League shirts. They could
Right.
sell National League shirts. I just do they? How much money is too much?
Right. Right. Well, it's funny. I went to the 79 game with my late dad. I was 8 going on 9. You went to the 59 game, you were 10. So I have vivid memories. That 79 game was an amazing experience. Steve, a little more on baseball here. The Oakland A's, I think, are pretty set to move to Las Vegas. Should Major League Baseball do more to try to protect the Oakland market?
Well, they did nothing, so anything would be more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yes, of course. I mean, it's not that much different than the Sonics. That there's a great history there. I've been to games there, World Series, playoff games, that that are the atmosphere is electric. Um, Before they put the football uh, press bar luxury suites in the outfield, the view from the stadium out to the mountains was spectacular. Um, an Oakland A's game in the afternoon in September or October was one of my favorite things to cover. Um, and the owner just lost interest. Billy Ball doesn't work anymore anyway. So that all blew up. They traded, look at all the guys. How many A's were on the All-Star game? I know Matt Olson, Sean Murphy, and they were just there a couple years ago. It wasn't like this has been a 10-year project. They just got rid of everybody. And there's a reason for that. They wanted to make the franchise uh, low overhead. And but I've heard that Las Vegas isn't a lock yet, that there's other hurdles that have to be cleared. And I'm pretty sure Oakland's going to play in Oakland again next year.
Well, we'll have to see. It almost seems like it's tentative they're going to Vegas, but maybe there's more to it.
Do you want to go to Vegas? Do you want to go to Vegas and play in 114-degree heat? Because there's no dome stadium right now. It's going to take a
Right.
while to build one.
I don't like the extreme heat or the extreme cold. I'm kind of a Seattle mild weather guy, but that's
You belong
uh,
here.
speaking of the you mentioned the Sonics situation has some similarities to the Oakland A's situation right now, the relocation battle. Adam Silver made some comments that were probably some of the more suggestive that the NBA is very interesting on XL we've heard in a long, long time. Do you think we're going to have a franchise actually playing here in the 2020s?
I've answered this question since 2012, and you know, when they left, I knew this was what was going to happen. We were going to be chasing our tail. Hey, maybe we can get Memphis. No, we can't get Memphis. Oh, we're going to get Sacramento. It's no doubt that we're going to get Sacramento. We didn't get Sacramento. And now there's this long wasteland period. And yeah, when the collective bargaining agreement and the TV deal is all tied up, they're gonna have two expansion franchises, and if one of them isn't Seattle, I don't know what's going to happen. But that's not going to be now till 2025, 26 probably, I believe. And and it's another thing, and I hate to keep crying poor mouth, but um, tickets are going to be super expensive, and it's going to be your team. But how many games are you going to get to go see if you're just an average fan? I went to a couple Kraken games this year and looked around at the crowd, and I mean, they weren't all Bill Gateses. They were normal, hardworking citizens who were bringing their two kids and their wife and husband and loading up on food when they get there and parking for $50, $60. I don't know how they do it. I really don't know how they do it. And I empathize with them. I mean, I was spoiled. I went to every game for free for 40 years. So I'm sort of having my eyes opened. At the same time, prices since I've retired are just ridiculous. And again, it's what, how much do you need and who are you catering to? And what happens when, for instance, the Kraken win 22 games one year, which, it's pretty inevitable that's going to happen. Um, you're still going to sell those. Who's going to come to the games? And is the passion going to drain? And where do you go from there?
Yeah, those Kraken games are fun. I've gone to a bunch, but
Oh
they're
yeah,
definitely not cheap. And NHL's a great product. I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning as I'm watching it. The thing with the whole NBA situation, you bring something up there about the prices, and there's all the other dynamic. If we end up having the NHL and the NBA in Seattle, what is having the NBA here going to affect the Kraken? There's a bunch of moving parts, aren't there?
yeah. Maybe too many moving parts. I've always thought that whichever franchise gets here first, the NHL or the NBA, that's going to be the main franchise. And the Kraken beat them there, and the Kraken have had success, and they're getting better. They're not getting worse. So I think the Sonics. I mean, I hate to say this, but I think the Sonics might have a tough go because expansion in the NBA is a lot different than expansion in the NHL, and the Sonics are going to be bad for a long time. And here's another thing. We'll be paying ticket prices to see LeBron and Kawhi and Embiid and Damian Lillard. Oh, I'm sorry, load management. They're not here tonight. There's going to be a lot of that. And the great thing about hockey players, they don't believe in load management. If they can skate, they're going to play. And I think that's going to win a lot of fans and keep a lot of fans. But this load management thing, especially when you're playing a team, you're coming into town uh, against a team that's not in the playoffs, you're going to rest some of your guys.
Steve,
And go
go
ahead, I'm
ahead.
sorry.
I interrupt you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, so you're paying the price to see LeBron, but you're getting, you know, JaVale McGee or something like that. I don't know
Let me
what team
throw
he's
out a
on
thought
now.
to you, Steve. Tell me if this is possible. That if the Seattle ownership group ends up paying, I don't know, a $2 billion expansion fee, something absolutely insane, could
Yep.
there be a deal where the expansion rules will be more friendly for the two new teams coming in? Could you see maybe the expansion rules getting adjusted a little bit, or a team could get better quicker with that type of expansion fee?
Let me think about that. No, no, I don't think so. I don't think these owners are going to give the Sonics and the Vegas franchise any breaks.
No leniency on that. You're
I mean,
probably
that's the history.
wondering. Yeah, I was kind of wondering. Well, I guess I have a couple of questions to the audience, Steve. Let me get one in here. One listener posted on Facebook, and this person is interested in you mentioning a couple players that got mad at you after you wrote a tough column. Do you have a story or two you can share?
Sure. I got a million of them. uh, in my early days writing columns about the Mariners in the early 80s, they weren't very good, but they had potential. We had Spike Owen, Mike Moore. They had guys coming up, Danny Tartable, um, guys who might develop. And I was talking, and they didn't. None of them liked me because they were. I thought they were underachieving. So I'm interviewing. I love umpires, and I was interviewing Steve Palermo behind the batting cage before a game. Probably the best umpire, maybe the best umpire ever. Certainly the best of his generation. And Spike Owen is maybe 20 feet in front of us. He's throwing balls at us. Well, he's throwing balls at me, not Palermo. And Palermo yells at him, "Hey, if you hit me, you're out of the game." And I said, "No, he's aiming at me." And he was. I mean, it's like giving me a hot foot. I'm hopping up and down. And so Palermo finally just told him, "Don't do that anymore."
Could have been
But
hurt with a major league player throwing a ball at you from 20 feet away.
yeah, yeah.
Jeez.
So there's that. One of my favorite. I have a couple others. One of my favorite stories was Junior got to the All-Star game for the first time, and he still was doing immature things like not running out ground balls and just not being as good as I thought he could be. So I wrote a column the day before the All-Star game saying, "How good do you want to be?" and brought up all the things that I think he can do better. And he being one of the greatest talents in baseball, he should live up to that. And it wasn't a negative, it wasn't a rip job by any means. It was like, I want you to be good. I Sunday before I wrote it, I went to Jim Lefever's office. He was the manager, and I said, I got this idea for column on Junior. What do you think? And he said, he was wrong about this, but he said, you'd be a hero in the clubhouse, which was just the opposite. But anyway, so Junior goes, it's in the games, I think it's in Toronto. He calls me on Monday afternoon. I'm sitting in the living room with my wife, and I pick up the phone. Oh no, she's at the office. I pick up the phone, and she was on the other line at work, and I said, I got to go. It's Junior. Call me back as soon as you're done. So a half hour later, she calls me back and says, you didn't call me back. I said, I'm still talking to him. So an hour later, you didn't call me back. I'm still talking to him. 2.5 hours we talked. And he went through a whole thing about how veterans weren't treating him well and just how tough it was being Ken Griffey Sr.'s son, expectations. Sometimes you just have to step back and relax and not think about the expectations. I mean, he was great. He was really, really good. And, but 2.5 hours, it was just, I mean, it was incredible. And now, anytime I see him, and this is what, 20 years later, I don't even know, he quotes from that column. And this is one of the greatest players of all time. And he's still upset that I question his direction. But that also kind of speaks to the drive that Griffey has. And he said something to Dave Sims during the All-Star break just recently that column was one of the things that motivated. So I kind of took a little pride in that.
Right.
And I always loved talking to Junior because, I mean, it often went around in circles, but he was really trying, when I talked to him, he was always trying to tell me something. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't mean spirited at all. He was always trying to tell me something. And we got to watch. I mean, sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you don't quite know how great the guy is you're watching, but we were watching greatness back then. And, you don't get that very often.
It seems to me, Steve, the way you're telling the story, that Griffey had some very deep sensitivity about that column. He talked about it for a couple hours and stuff. It seems like it really affected him in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't expect it, that's for sure. And if I did expect anything, I was expecting snarky stuff. But no, it was a kind of a grown up response to some criticism.
And the Spiko and throwing balls at your story. I won't. That's
Yeah.
quite one.
Well,
Um,
and it's Steve Palermo. It's the best umpire in baseball, and he's protecting me. He's threatening to throw Spike out of the game if he hits me.
right. And a protective guy bodyguard there. Another question we got is I'm kind of sort of paraphrasing it. What was Lou Piniella like after a tough loss?
um, he was short. He didn't usually say much, but I'll tell you what, when in those situations, you better ask the right question because he'll make you 2 feet 6 with like 3 words, and you knew you were in trouble. Like he knew all us, and he knew who we were, and you knew you were in trouble when he said, "Well, sir," and it's like, oh, I know it's coming, and it's not good. But he was. I loved Lou. I loved covering him. two quick stories. One is every Sunday we would be in his office. He would be chain smoking, and he would tell great stories while we were all getting secondhand smoke and possibly risking our lives to hear what he said. But he would spin stories about the Yankees and players on the Yankees and his days in Kansas City, and um, it was storytelling time, and it was so great. And he's I believe, a wonderful man. I was helping out a boy, um, Ari Grashin, who um, had a brain tumor, and I had met him. A friend of mine had introduced me to him, and Ari was the kind of guy that once you became his friend, he wouldn't let go of you. And I spent a lot of time with him. We did a lot of fun things. We went to a Mariner game, and after the game, his favorite player was Charles Gibson, if you remember him. And he and Ari and a couple of his friends were with me. We went down. They went down to the locker room to see Charles Gibson, and he had forgotten, and he left. And the guys were heartbroken. So I went in the clubhouse. Fortunately, the Mariners had won that day, and Joe Pinheiro had pitched like a three-hitter. I saw Lou, and I said, "Lou, can you do me a favor?" And I told him the story, and oh, sure, bring him in. So I brought him in, and for about a half hour, Lou took him around. Ari was in a wheelchair, took him around to all the players that were still there, introduced them. And Ari, who was kind of a wise guy, started saying, "Why'd you pull Pinheiro in the eighth inning?" And asked him a bunch of like, "Why'd you do this?" questions. And Lou answered them as if it was, a professional sports writer. So that was the other side of Lou. He accompanied Ari back out of the clubhouse, and Lou was a little choked up. It was just that kind of moment, and I was choked up watching Lou.
Yeah, you and I talked about Ari Grashin, I think on one of our interviews I did with you, and I had your friend Steve Boone on, and Steve had some great stories about Ari Grashin. So really sad that we lost him at such a young age. Before this interview started, the name Dick Williams came up. He was a Mariners manager. He always struck me as a real character, Dick Williams. Can you share a fun Dick Williams or two story?
Well, when he came, Barry Bloom, who's a friend of mine and was covering the San Diego Padres when Dick Williams was the manager, called me and he said, "Get out of town, get as far away from him as you can." And of course, I didn't. And for the first 3 or 4 weeks, I went on the first road trip with them, and he was great. And he was honest about how bad the team was and what the team needed and what he was going to provide. But they kept losing. They kept losing. And um, I remember asking him, "Oh, I know Steve Carlton was pitching for the White Sox." And Steve Carlton, Hall of Famer, 300 game winner. And there were like 10,000 people in the stands for Steve Carlton. And I said, after the game, I said, "What do you think about that?" And that was like the end of our relationship. "What do you mean? I don't care how many people were there. I don't care that we couldn't hit the ball. I care what it." And so I called Barry and said, "You were right. It took a little while, but you were right."
I have
But
Dick Williams' book somewhere on my bookshelf back here. It's a fun biography. He took shots at George Ardrose for being too cheap, and he was an outspoken baseball guy.
they could
Uh,
use him now. They could use him now.
right,
I mean, there's
right.
no way he could manage in the major leagues in 2023, but
Sure.
they
Got
could
time for
use
a
a
few
little
more
more
questions?
fire. I'm
You got
sorry.
time for a few more questions? You got time for a few more questions?
I'm retired. I got till about midnight. So
Okay. Well, I wouldn't do that.
let her rip. Yeah,
I
that's
would
fun.
I would do that to you. Husky basketball. Mike Hopkins, I think contract goes through the 24-25 season. I don't know. It just seems right now that it's almost like going to a graveyard at Husky basketball games. Can you give us some thoughts on this whole situation right now?
Yeah. Well, this year they were completely irrelevant. No one talked about them. There was no energy in the arena, um, and everything went south on this team when he had Jaden McDaniels, and he had the guy with the Pistons. I'm spacing on his name now. He's now playing in the NBA and playing really well. He had two blue chip one and doners and did nothing with them. They didn't even make the NIT, and that was sort of the beginning of the game. And there's a rumor out there that he's really tough on the kids, and you see a lot of defections in this um, transfer portal, which is a nightmare. Um, he's a lot of guys have left for the transfer portal. On the other hand, he's brought some pretty good guys in. He's brought like the second tier of the transfer portal guys who had good years at smaller schools for the most part. He brought in Severe Wheeler, the point guard for Kentucky, to work with Keon Brooks, the big man, and that could be a pretty good combination. They could be pretty decent this year. I don't know if it's too late or not. Um, if with all these guys he's brought in, if he doesn't make, I think he's got to make the NCAA. If he doesn't, he's gone.
What's your take on this talk about Larry Brown becoming an assistant coach at the UW?
Well, what happened to it? I haven't heard anything all of a sudden.
Yeah, I heard it looked like it was an imminent, almost done deal, and we haven't heard about it for several weeks. What could Larry Brown play a role in helping things out?
Well, I don't know if they had some discussion about what Larry Brown's role would be, and it determined that it wasn't going to work. I would love him here. He's kind of a George Karl. He was George Karl before George Karl, and he loves basketball. He's incredibly intense. He'll talk basketball all day. He's completely honest. My my favorite thing about him is he he never gave up on a game, win or lose. And they were beating he was with Detroit. They were winning the NBA championship. There was a minute to go in the game. All the players are on the bench hugging. The reserves are in the game, and Darko Milicic turns the ball over, and Larry starts stomping around and and um, uh, Ricky Mayhorn grabbed him and just pulled him away and like slapped a smile onto his face. It's like it's over. We don't have to coach right now.
He'd be a
But
he'd be an interesting guy to spend time with.
but I think we need some personality. I don't Hop doesn't seem to have a personality that reflects in a game to the fans. Um, and somebody like Larry Brown, even as a assistant coach, would bring that.
Hopkins
I'd
gets
love to have him here.
energetic, but yeah, there's gotta wonder. I'm gonna hit on I think two more subjects, Steve. All this conference shuffling talk. What do you think the University of Washington State University should do?
Uh, I don't know that. See, now you're asking me questions where I'm not smart enough to answer
No, you can.
them. But they've got to go. I don't know where they go, but I think they better go to the Big 12 or the Big 10 like tomorrow. And I don't think either one of those conferences is going to take WSU. And my concern, my worry, and I hope I'm wrong, is they're going to end up in the Mountain West. It's a cutthroat business now, and it's what can you bring to the table, and by what I mean cash. And it's a tough time to be Washington State, Stanford, Cal. Um, I don't know what's going to happen.
Do you think it'd be a shame, Steve, that I have Washington State in the same conference?
If I'm sorry.
Do you think it'd be a shame if Washington State and UW were not in the same conference?
Yeah. Yeah. If the Apple Cup didn't mean anything, if it was a non-conference game in September, yeah, it would be horrible.
I'm old school. I still like the geographic rivalries and stuff.
I agree, but that's long gone. I used to learn geography by looking at college teams and finding out where they were and what conference they
Right.
were in. You can't do that anymore. Oh, Rutgers, they're in the Big Ten. They must be in the Midwest somewhere because that's what it is now.
Right. Right. 2023 Seahawks. Any thoughts?
Boy, a great. It's great to speculate. Um, they've shored up their defense. If Geno Smith is the real deal, if he continues to work hard, I mean, he was amazing last year. Now, was that a aberration, or is that who Geno Smith really is after 10 years? That's a question. But he's got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and he's got weapons. Um, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it should be just a fun year. It's a pretty good home schedule. Um, let's kick it off.
Yeah, I am too. And I had the new quarterbacks coach, Geno's new quarterbacks coach, Greg Olson on my show a few weeks back.
Another
Great
great interview, by the way. Another great interview.
Greg's a
Love
great
that.
guy. He's a heck of a nice guy. I got to know him this year. Just a great guy, and he has a lot. He's very positive about the Hawks this year. So, well, Steve, I won't talk to you till midnight, but I will fully intend to have you back again, and love all your insights on a potpourri of subjects. I could talk to you for hours, but I really appreciate you doing this, and I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Appreciate being here always.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
You bet.
Appreciate it.